Picture the Mediterranean, 3rd century BC, 300 Roman warships holding strict formation, rhythmic drumbeats echoing below deck. Oars striking salt water in perfect unison, bronze rams catching the sun, the air heavy with pitch, sweat, and sea salt. Nothing afloat could challenge this ancient navy. Now drag that armada north, drop it right into the North Atlantic. October, 12-meter swells, wind so cold it sears exposed skin, water temp 2 degrees above freezing. Every single one of those ships splinters apart. That is not a guess. We know exactly what happened when rigid Roman hulls met brutal ocean forces. Absolute catastrophe. Meanwhile, in a drafty coastal shed up in Scandinavia, a Norse shipwright splits raw oak with a hand axe. 0 blueprints. No written plans, just iron rivets, animal hair for caulking, and 1,000 years of hard-won knowledge. The vessel he is shaping will cross that exact ocean. In fact, variations of it are still built today. 2 ancient civilizations, 2 entirely different maritime philosophies. One built to project power, the other built purely to survive. We are looking at why only one of those maritime systems worked everywhere on Earth, from Arctic ice to Middle Eastern rivers. The whole answer comes down to a single engineering choice. A choice that separated a navy trapped in one sea from a fleet of longships that conquered every ocean they touched. Let me ask you this: if you controlled the strongest ancient military force on water, 300 warships, 50,000 trained oarsmen, would you shut it down for 5 months straight every single year? Rome did exactly that, and they had 0 choice. The Roman trireme was a staggering machine, 37 meters long, 170 oars stacked on 3 levels. Each bank pulling at a slightly different angle. The raw coordination alone was incredible. Below deck, timekeepers hammered out the tempo while heavily armed marines waited up top. Their ultimate weapon was the rostrum, a massive bronze ram at the waterline designed for one specific job: smash the bow straight through an enemy hull at full speed. Roman naval strategy was never about outsailing the other guy. It was about punching a giant hole in them. For 5 centuries, it dominated. From Carthage down to Alexandria, nobody could match Roman scale, strict discipline, or sheer firepower on those Mediterranean waters. But here is what the history books usually skip. Rome had a rigid rule, mare clausum, the closed sea. From November through March, their entire fleet was tied up in the harbor, 5 long months every single year. The biggest maritime superpower on Earth sat totally idle. Why? Because their own shipbuilders understood a brutal reality. Those heavy galleys could not survive winter storms. And we know exactly what happened when they forced it. In 255 BC, a massive Roman fleet returning from North Africa hit a sudden storm off Sicily. Ancient records report over 270 ships lost, 100,000 men drowned in one afternoon. Not an enemy ambush, just bad weather. If you were standing on that Sicilian coast watching those warships vanish, you would be witnessing the deadliest maritime disaster in all of recorded history. It happened because perfectly rigid hulls built for calm waters slammed into kinetic forces they were never engineered to absorb. So here is the real question: 1,000 kilometers north, another culture was building Viking ships in wooden sheds and launching them into waters 10 times worse than Rome ever saw. Their wooden longships did not just survive the Atlantic. They absolutely thrived in it. The Gokstad ship, dug out of a Norwegian burial mound in 1880, measures 23 meters long and just over 5 meters wide. It carried 32 oarsmen. That is barely a fifth of the Roman crew count, yet it was meant for the most violent oceans on Earth. How? What did Norse boat builders figure out about the sea that brilliant Roman engineers completely missed? Before we hit the actual mechanics, let us kill a myth that ruins popular history. The myth is that Rome was advanced and Vikings were just thugs who got lucky with wood. False. The dirt tells a much cooler story. Here's a detail people usually ignore. Rome never actually invented its own navy. When the First Punic War forced them to fight Carthage on the water, Roman engineers basically had 0 shipbuilding tradition. Ancient texts say they dragged up a wrecked Carthaginian warship and reverse engineered the whole thing, plank by literal plank. They were brilliant copycats. Sure, they tweaked the design and added that heavy boarding bridge. And they manufactured fast, but the core hull tech totally borrowed. Viking clinker construction, on the other hand, was pure native genius. No stolen blueprints, no captured enemy boat used as a cheat code. This system evolved slowly along freezing Scandinavian coasts, passed down by generations of builders who tested every tiny tweak against the savage North Atlantic. They only kept what did not sink, like we mentioned before. These are the exact same people who engineered longhouses with passive thermal barriers and smart airflow. These were highly deliberate problem solvers who understood raw materials and stress physics at a level that blows modern researchers away. The real contrast isn't civilized versus primitive, it is borrowed versus original. And in the naval engineering department, the Norse wrote the book. Now for the actual mechanics, because this is the clincher. Roman builders relied on shell-first construction. They shaped the outer hull first, then jammed a support frame inside. Heavy wooden planks sat flush, edge to edge, locked by tight mortise and tenon joints. Precision-cut interlocking pegs, hammered tight with hardwood dowels, every single piece aggressively fused to its neighbor. The result was a totally rigid, perfectly smooth surface, great for the calm Mediterranean. Predictable loads, tiny waves, extremely short hops between warm ports. A stiff hull meant speed and stability in that exact environment, but the Norse did the absolute opposite, clinker style, overlapping planks. Each one pinned to the one below using forged iron rivets. The frame went in after the hull was shaped. The wood flexed and shifted by design, but here is the trick that separates good design from pure genius. And most history buffs miss this entirely. Norse shipbuilders didn't saw their oak, they split it. Picture a straight-grained oak log. A master builder lines up an iron wedge straight down the grain and slams it. The timber splits naturally, following its own hidden structural lines. Every single wood fiber runs completely unbroken from one end of that board to the other, if you have ever worked real timber by hand. You know the massive difference between slicing across the grain and moving with it. One fights the living material, the other lets the wood do what it evolved to do. Viking shipwrights felt this at a level any modern carpenter would respect. A sawn board slashes fibers at random, looks clean, sure, but it is structurally crippled at every cut. Splitting a plank keeps every wood fiber completely intact. Bend it, and the whole hull fights back as one solid piece of engineering. Now drop both ships into a violent North Atlantic storm. A 12-meter wave slams into a rigid Roman hull, blasting all that energy straight through the stiff joints. The frame fights, strains, and then shatters because it simply cannot bend. Now watch that same wave strike a Viking clinker hull. The overlapping planks slide against each other just slightly. Just enough to eat the impact, spread out the stress, and let the wave roll through without breaking a single point of the ship. The modern equivalent is spot on. Airplane fuselages are built to flex in rough turbulence, absorbing that shock instead of fighting it. Viking clinker hulls use that exact same physics. Controlled bending under massive weight. Norse boat builders figured this out using hand axes and iron rivets 8 centuries before stress analysis was even invented. Some historians claim splitting wood was just a weakness. They argue the Vikings lacked big saws and simply improvised. Others view it as pure material science, sharpened by hundreds of years surviving the ocean. The Skulldalev ships pulled from Roskilde Fjord back in the 1960s reveal plank sizes so perfectly uniform that it cannot be luck. What do you think about this? Rome built a concrete wall, huge, imposing, but fragile if struck right. The Vikings essentially built a suspension bridge, and only one of those designs actually survives the open ocean. Construction shows you how a ship is made, design shows you its real purpose. This is exactly where the massive gap between Roman and Norse problem-solving hits you. A Roman trireme had exactly one job: hunt down the enemy and sink them. A heavy bronze ram up front, a thick, reinforced keel to handle the crash. 3 rows of oars for sudden, explosive bursts of speed. A wide deck packed with fighting marines, every single detail built for one specific battle. In that fight, it was terrifying. Outside of combat, it was a total disaster. 170 rowers. Every single man requires water, rations, and sleeping space. They produce waste, catch diseases, and demand constant replacement. That warship was a massive supply nightmare that only an empire could feed. The Gokstad longship carried 32 men. The Skulldalev II longship, a fierce warship pulled from Roskilde Fjord and traced back to 1042 AD, measured 30 meters long and held a crew of 60. Even at that massive scale, that is barely a third of the Roman crew. But here is the statistic that shatters this whole debate. if you love this kind of engineering breakdown. Dropping a like takes 1 second and really supports the channel. Now, the math that matters. A Viking longship under full sail easily hit 10 to 12 knots in good wind. A Roman trireme, burning the energy of 170 sweating rowers, hit 7 or 8 knots and tired quickly. The Vikings matched or beat that speed using a fraction of the muscle. That is not just ship design, it is a logistical revolution. Total versatility sealed their advantage. The trireme fought. That was its only job. The longship raided, traded, discovered new lands, hauled families, ran up rivers, and parked on flat beaches. One hull, one crew, ready for anything. A standard Viking longship drew just about 1 meter of water. The Roman trireme demanded more than 1.5 meters when fully packed. That tiny difference, barely reaching a man's waist, allowed Norse sailors to slide right onto flat shorelines, push up shallow river mouths, and land miles away from any actual harbor. Rome burned through 170 rowers to get the speed Vikings got with 30. A single Roman ship ate more supplies per trip than an entire Norse village farmed in a year. The Roman navy did not just build bigger boats. They created massive logistical nightmares and then required an entire empire to fix them. Over 200 verified Viking landing spots stretch from Norway all the way to Newfoundland. These were not built ports, just raw geography, flat sand, low water, and a brilliant hull. Rome required stone docks, deep water, and heavy infrastructure. The Vikings just needed a beach and 30 minutes. If you rank naval power strictly by fleet size, Rome wins. Absolute blowout, but unroll a map on your table. Pinpoint every single body of water each empire's ships actually sailed. The entire picture flips upside down. Roman war fleets never really pushed past the Mediterranean and its closest edges. A totally enclosed, predictable basin. Their mighty navy never dared to cross the wild North Sea. Never sailed out into the open Atlantic expecting to survive. Meanwhile, Viking longships dominated an exploration zone that makes the Roman territory look tiny. Just look at the Norway to Iceland run, 900 nautical miles across the open North Atlantic. No landmarks, no shelter, 4 to 6 days exposed to water that barely reaches 2 degrees. Viking crews made this trip regularly, steering their course using star charts, reading the wave patterns, and tracking flying seabirds. Not a single Roman ship could survive that run in the best weather, but the Vikings kept pushing. Bjarni Herjolfsson pushed completely off track around 986 AD. Became the absolute first European to spot the actual coastline of North America. He refused to dock, but he certainly reported the massive forests. Within 15 years, Leif Erikson tracked his exact route, building a base camp at Vinland in modern Newfoundland. 5 whole centuries before Columbus even bought a ship, and they did not just sail west. Norse maritime networks pushed straight up the Volga and Dnieper rivers, cutting deep inside modern Russia until they struck the massive gates of Constantinople and the distant Caspian Sea. That identical shallow draft that slid right onto icy Atlantic beaches let these ships push hundreds of miles inland, navigating narrow choke points barely wider than the wood itself. The Seine to Paris, the Volga to the Caspian, the open Atlantic to Newfoundland, not different ships. The exact same hull design handled every environment. It conquered everything. If you have ever spent hours on truly open water, completely out of sight of land with nothing but the horizon, you know what it really means to trust a boat with your life. Hugging the coast is basic navigation. Crossing an ocean is absolute commitment. The Vikings engineered for that commitment. Romans never bothered. Here is a real question to think about. Was Rome actually the greatest maritime power of the ancient world, or just the biggest bully in one single enclosed sea? Tell me your thoughts below. Medieval European kingdoms, scraping together broken bits of Roman sailing knowledge, kept themselves glued to safe coastal waters for centuries after Rome collapsed. The Vikings were blasting across deep oceans while the rest of Europe was afraid to leave the beach. This is where the contrast cuts deepest, and it has nothing to do with warfare or speed. Roman shell-first assembly died alongside Rome when the empire finally collapsed. Complex mortise and tenon shipbuilding completely vanished. The design was just too complicated, relying heavily on massive imperial shipyards and centralized Roman money. Medieval European shipwrights basically started from scratch, but Viking clinker construction, it never stopped, not for a single generation. In 1893, a Norwegian named Magnus Andersen built a true-to-life replica of the Gokstad ship, the exact vessel dug from a burial mound 13 years prior. He sailed it from Norway to Newfoundland. The crossing took 28 days, a 1,000-year-old Norse design untouched by modern engineering. Crossing the Atlantic under its own sail, Andersen noted the hull flexed up to 2 centimeters in heavy seas, the keel twisted with the waves. This ship didn't fight the ocean. It moved with it exactly as the original builders intended. In 2021, UNESCO added Nordic clinker traditions to its intangible cultural heritage list. Today, shipwrights across Norway, Sweden, and Denmark still build clinker vessels using techniques a 10th-century Viking engineer would recognize in a heartbeat. If you have ever built something meant to survive, not just for a season or a decade, but across generations, you know what that kind of continuity means. The Norse didn't just build ships, they forged a survival system so tough it outlived competing empires. One maritime philosophy drained an empire's entire treasury to maintain. The other, it just took a craftsman, oak timber, and iron rivets. When Rome collapsed, its naval technology died. When Viking society changed, their ships kept sailing. Ask yourself which approach reveals higher engineering intelligence. Two civilizations stared at the exact same ocean and saw totally different problems. Rome saw a battlefield. Build a rigid platform for soldiers, strap a ram to the front, smash the enemy, then hide in the harbor when storms hit. To Rome, the sea was the enemy. The Norse saw a highway. They built a hull that flexes instead of breaking. One that handles oceans, rivers, and open beaches, requiring 30 men instead of 170. Then they pushed toward every horizon in any weather. Rome engineered for control, the Norse built for freedom, and over the long arc of history, the ocean rewarded the system that respected it, the design that learned to roll with the deep water forces instead of rigidly resisting them. Not through brute force, through a deeper understanding. Look, if this is the kind of history you enjoy, the raw engineering, the critical survival choices, the true intelligence behind how ancient civilizations actually operated, then this channel is for you. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. We have so much to tell. The Roman fleet dominated one sea for 5 centuries. Norse longships reached 4 continents across 3. Rome's rigid shipbuilding tradition died with its falling empire. The Viking method is still on the water today. Brute power impresses, but real adaptability endures.